Okay. All right, I am here with Andrea Byers, and I'm so excited to ask her some questions. This little chat came as a result of she and I talking about tongue ties and the effect on breathing, and then my ponderings on a very common yoga instruction, which is given during either shavasana or pranayama to rest your tongue on the bottom of the mouth. And having had a tongue tie and having had it revised, I actually experience my breath to be better when my tongue is up. So that just started me on this inquiry, and I've had the distinct honor of having Andrea work on my body. She is an incredibly gifted cranial sacral practitioner here in the Bay Area. She's a graduate of the Acupressure Institute. She has studied cranial sacral work for a long time. She specializes with pediatrics. She's done pre and perinatal massage. She's also a certified postpartum doula. She has studied with Dr. Svetlana Moskatova, did I say that right? For the reflex system, and she has had the honor, as have I, of doing Gil Headley's dissection lab. And I'm sure I've missed a few things of all the incredible things you study, but anyway, she's incredibly knowledgeable, and I'm going to hand it over to her, and I would like to hear your thoughts on some of my ponderings.
They're very exciting ponderings, Leslie. Leave it to you.
Just for anatomy geeks like us, but
for us, for nerds.
Yes.
Well, the specific question as far as inquiring about where the tongue should be in the mouth was something that I never even thought about. I myself knew that I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was tongue thrusting laterally, like since I was a kid. I remember
do that. Does that mean the sides of your tongue were going out, or you were pushing the tongue, the tip of
sides of my tongue pushed towards my teeth?
Interesting.
So I pushed this way. Yeah. And I distinctly remember as a kid not liking waking up with drool on my pillow in my face. And so I created like a suction. I also had other cranial tension patterns, and I sucked my thumb, and I had all kinds of stuff like that. But when I started working with acupuncturists, they were like, oh, your tongue is scalloped and it means all of these things. And then pretty soon in my progress, because I work with infants, all of the introduction to tongue tie was because I was working with infants with breastfeeding problems. And so
and you also studied with Dr. Hazel, what's her last name?
Yeah, Dr. Allison Hazel Baker.
Yes, she's also a specialist on tongue ties. So please, say more.
Yeah, she's at the forefront of physiology. I've never met anyone who has more of a grasp on anatomy and physiology. And with the distinction around embryological development into infancy and suck, swallow, breathe, and all that. So that was my introduction into all of this. And so at that point when I'm like, oh, tongue, can I lift my tongue? Where is my tongue usually? And I realized that I was tongue thrusting laterally so much, I started to pay attention, just like so many things, right? Like our breath in the beginning and our feet grounding and all those things as we begin to come into awareness about the health and alignment of ourselves. So certainly in my journey with my yoga practice, as I began to notice my tongue thrusting, which I would do to hold a pose, I would definitely tongue thrust more when I was had tension and was trying to work on something. And then I noticed that it would be less as I was more relaxed and more fluid and more an allowance of my pose. But my tongue is always behind my top two teeth, the front incisors. So that is the agreed upon tongue placement that is optimal as I've learned it. So
can you explain to our listeners why that is optimal?
So the tip of our tongues on our palate, which is the roof of our mouth, behind our top two teeth, our front incisors, allows for the rest of the body of the tongue into the posterior tongue to be forward enough so that our posterior tongue isn't falling back into our airway. So we share our airway is it's a very small place, and we share it with our esophagus, which is taking our food to our stomach and our digestion. So it's a very small area, and it, due to available space and tension patterns, it can vary greatly from individual to individual. So some people...
Can I just interrupt you? Also, people who had retractive braces, which I had, so where they took extractions. I know they don't do that as much anymore, but it used to be a really common thing. That also can compromise your airway. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we all start with different levels of structure and levels of alignment and access to our airway to begin with, and then all of the different conditions. And as we understand epigenetics, it can affect where the available space in our mouth and where our tongue sits in our mouth, which affects our airway. So having our tongue, the tip of our tongue behind our front two teeth, in theory, allows for the tongue to stay forward and out of the airway. So the posterior tongue is elevated and forward to a degree. Whereas, and you can try this yourself, whereas when you drop your tongue, it can fall back into your airway. And then of course, if you drop your tongue and you're laying back, you're supine, gravity is also pulling your tongue back.
So then lying down, doing a pranayama breath practice, especially if you had a compromised airway, would not be a good idea.
You would feel that relationship to air having a clear pathway back through your nasal pharynx would be compromised. And, depending on one's awareness at a given moment, you might hear some snoring, you might hear just a little rattling or congestion there. One might also just kind of compensate for that and take in a little less air. So a lot of different things can happen.
So I'm curious, do you have some thoughts about why this common yoga instruction might have come about? To relax the tongue to the bottom of the mouth? It's like, I hear it all the time, especially in the Iyengar system where I usually study.
Well, I've, spent a lot of time studying the fascial lines that are, that really hold our systems together and how they meet and integrate. And so the interesting thing about our tongue in relationship to the rest of our body, it is a part of this deep front postural line that goes all the way. So this part, it has 3 different attachments up through here, and it attaches all the way up to the temporalis. So the relationship to where our tongue is, as well as our airway, is greatly affected by that postural line that then comes down behind our sternum, through our diaphragm, wraps around our hips, behind our thighs, wraps our knees, and then goes all the way down to right here. So that relationship that should be, buoyant and balanced, certainly has an anchor point with our tongue. So depending on our alignment and our structure and our tension patterns, the relationship to where our tongue is in our mouth and breathing, I'm guessing, depends on that relationship of the deep front postural line as well. I'm wondering if in the past, when we didn't sit in chairs and use computers and drive cars and do all of the things that has brought us forward with all this tension and whatnot. Also, our birth practices were very different. I'm wondering if maybe that instruction was one way to influence that postural line, whereas like you can't really like relax the arch of your foot and like drop that as much as you can easily go
Right.
drop your tongue to the floor of your mouth. So exploring that relationship between that long link from our head, from the base of our head, even into our attachment at our cranium, all the way down through our breathing mechanism, all the way down through our feet. If we're going to play with that a little bit, one place to do that is our tongue. So that's that's an idea.
So it could be a good instruction for someone who had no tongue tie, who had optimal facial development, meaning no retractive braces, chewed hard food growing up, so they have perfectly aligned teeth without having braces, and you were sitting up. Right.
And yeah.
And right. What percentage of people do you see that have that?
We're working on it.
I mean, I'm kind of kidding, but
we're working on it.
Yeah.
Well, since your inquiry, I've been kind of wondering, and I'm going to play. I haven't really played with it myself, but I'm going to play with your beautiful direction of pelvic floor breathing, and maybe mirror that with my tongue.
Oh, so that when you're inhaling, you'll widen your tongue, and exhaling, you'll elevate your tongue? Is that what you're thinking? Interesting.
That's what I'm wondering.
Hey, that's a good inquiry for anyone listening to this. Give it a try. I mean, it's created, what my questioning has created a bit of controversy. It's very interesting. People have really dug in on both sides of this. And I think after asking a lot of senior yoga teachers and talking to singing teachers and talking to you, I think the answer is what is one's own experience, right? Yeah, and that we all have to play with it and figure out what's best for us. But what you said about lying back is interesting, because I believe Mr. Iyengar is credited for introducing lying down pranayama, that in the older texts where they talk about breathing practices, it's all sitting up, not lying down. So that the difference of just the relationship of gravity with your tongue could have a negative effect, possibly. So
yep.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's all worth exploring in our bodies, paying, even if it's just our initial interest in where our tongue is at different times of the day or in different yoga poses.
Right.
Or
right.
when we take a deep breath, like where we start to notice that our tongue inherently likes to be or doesn't like to be, all of that.
So if you were instructing someone to relax their tongue, how would you instruct that?
Well, I think that always it will depend on where their resting posture is, and we build from there. So my way of working with our bodies is to find our resting neutral and then gently offer other alternatives and kind of stretching from that place a little bit. So, if an individual does, and I will say that as I work with people and we're trying to deconstruct what's going on with whatever issue they've come in with, I often say, where's your tongue in your mouth? And most people report that the tip of their tongue is behind their front incisors on their hard palate. I will say that most people do. And people that are coming to me because they're having dysfunction. So, there is, I'm noticing that that's there a lot. Now, obviously there's a huge group of the population that's not happening, and there's mouth breathing, and that is happening for sure.
So we know mouth breathing is really bad. Also, it can be a contributor to snoring and sleep apnea. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes. Which seems rampant right now in our country. Yeah.
For a lot of different reasons.
Right.
So I guess I would check and see, where is your tongue naturally resting right now? And then with this concept of the tip of our tongue being behind our front incisors, if it's not there, we'll just kind of like gently move to that place. And I like to have people sitting up for this, because we spend most of our conscious time sitting up, and most of us who are going to be able to do any work and shift any of this, it's going to be daytime when we're up and thinking. So I usually have people sit up, and just kind of feel what happens as you move the tip of your tongue to the spot, is one of the ways that we talk about it, behind your front two teeth. And then just notice with your breath what happens with the rest of your tongue. So the full body of your tongue back to your posterior tongue, and just kind of allow and see what happens there. My way of working is to like listen and allow. So I want to see what happens there, and then from that point we can develop further instruction or further exercise once we see, because sometimes you can give the nervous system or the body a clue, and the body just picks it up and rolls with it, and it's just fine. Whereas other times there are a lot of compensatory stops in the way, and we've got to try to get through those before we can get to a place where we can open up in that way and do an exercise or corrective.
I know when I was, after I'd gotten my tongue tie released, one of the instructions, or one of the practices that my myofascial therapist gave me was, she gave me like a tiny little orthodontic rubber band, and I put it on like the middle of my tongue, and she wanted me to hold it up on the roof of my mouth to get my tongue to be stronger in doing that. So you're talking about the tip of the tongue behind the front teeth. Not to get too crazily specific, but I do want to. So like middle tongue should be up or not?
So it kind of, the middle tongue it's like a slow descent to the posterior tongue. So the middle tongue isn't really, well, it depends on what you call the middle tongue, but based on what you feel. But like the tip of the tongue is kind of like in a secure place, and then the middle tongue comes back. So this also has a huge part of what's available here is the shape of someone's palate.
Right.
So
because I had teeth taken out, my palate's super high, so it was like impossible for me to get my tongue up.
Exactly. And I have a high narrow palate. So what at natural neutral rest, it's the tip of my tongue. And then, I can make the mid body blade of my tongue go up to my palate, but that wouldn't be a natural place of rest.
It's not a natural place, but then there's the work of John Mew, MEW, for those of you that want to look into this further. He's got a lot of YouTube videos, but he talks about tongue posture having the whole tongue up to help to support the face more because of our shrunken, narrow faces from our modern diets. But that's more of a practice rather than this is where my tongue should be all the time.
That's a practice to correct mid-face lack of development. Right. So infants who I work with and children who come in, I'm looking for their tongue to be all the way up on their palate, because that is what's going to widen their palate and bring their mid-face forward. So sinuses coming forward, airway channel vessel coming forward, all of that. So again, we have like an optimal situation, and then we have what the rest of us live with, which are an array of variations on all sides, from our tongue to our palate to our airway to our sinuses to our allergies to all this, our occlusion of our teeth. So it's really, which I think is what this inquiry is about. It's kind of challenging these ideas where we are like, oh, this is optimal, let me make myself do this, versus, oh, that's an interesting inquiry, let me curiously and openly and kindly explore that with myself and see what's true for my body. Oh, what I found is this, let me like further follow that train and see what could happen. And that's how we develop in a kind and loving way with ourselves, versus taking, reading a book or watching a YouTube thing
Or
and saying
listening
like,
to a
oh,
teacher.
or listening to a teacher
Yeah.
in any given moment, or listening to a therapist in any given moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say around this instruction, the tongue instruction? I mean, I'm offering my students just to play around with it because as I call myself a laboratory of one, I only have my own experience. Right. But I want to encourage, I want to just jump on what you were just saying is, we have to trust our own experience. So is there any other thing you'd like to say in closing?
Well, I think as we explore this, as we're suggesting, it's just really important to be aware of the rest of the chain of connection through the rest of our body. So, if you're exploring in pranayama and you're elevating your tongue to your palate where you're used to dropping your tongue down, just as you're exploring that, please check in with what your neck is doing. Please check in with what your thoracic is doing. Please check in with what your pelvis is doing, because that's where the information is going to come back and inform you, but it's also going to be affecting and informing your nervous system. And so you'll get more information if you don't just focus on the one instruction or the thing that you're playing with, but you're really like, okay, I've anchored my tongue to the spot and I'm breathing, and I really want to check, like, what's my scapula doing? Oh, my right shoulder's raising up really high. Oh, okay, I can feel that, so just being aware and conscious about all of that while you play.
Investigative.
Yeah, right. And gentle.
Yeah. And curious. I try to encourage curiosity in my students to to do this inner exploration. And then there's certain yoga cues that I'm like, where'd that come from? Like this one is rest your tongue on the bottom of the mouth, and another one that I'll explore another time, maybe with you, is tuck your tailbone. And I'm just going to say in closing, to connect those two things, is I find when I am able to really widen the root of my tongue, I can feel width on the sides of my tailbone, which I just think is extraordinary. So why would I want to tuck that tail?
Right.
And that's a whole nother conversation.
Right.
But thank you for your time. And if people wanted to experience your awesomeness, how would they find you?
My website is just my name, AndreaByers.com.
And Byers is Byers. Yeah. Okay. I really appreciate you geeking out with me on this. And
I love it. Anytime.
And I look forward to more.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.